Again, as I mentioned yesterday, we strongly recommend the LMR 400 cable. It's got low losses, both for the IF frequencies and the DC power. It's fairly robust. It's got a good bend radius. You can run up to 1,000 feet of it. There's plenty of other alternatives, Belden equivalents and whatever else. They're not exactly the same deal. If you're not running up to 1,000 feet, probably okay with it. Maybe you're saving some money. But just keep it in mind that we do recommend the LMR 400. And that's what we test everything with, is the LMR.
Price point's pretty good too.
Huh?
Price point's pretty good too.
If you supply, okay, so you can buy pre-made cables from us. I don't think a lot of you do, but you can. 100 feet, 200 feet, 250 feet, whatever you need, that already have the connectors on there. If you do supply your own cable, we do suggest that you sweep the cable for discontinuities in length to make sure that there's no problems before you hook it up. Because again, as I mentioned, there's nothing worse than having a brand new $10,000 link and hooking it all up. You're ready to meet that client deadline, and then all of a sudden, bam, you've fried your indoor unit because you shorted the IF cable. Okay, you gotta send it back, all that stuff. Also, if you do use some kind of inferior cable, this is more than likely the number one cause of low MSE. Okay, is that cable. This cable really needs to be terminated properly, and when you check it with your cable analyzer or whatever, you want to make sure that it's working well, clean. Talk about grounding a little bit more here, but basically we need to have high current grounding paths all along the way, so if you get hit by lightning, the lightning has a path to take other than the IF cable back into your shelter. At a minimum, you're going to do the grounding, the ODU at the antenna, okay? And then you want to go entry point into the building. If you've got a longer run, you're going to do it every 75 feet or so along the tower. I got pictures in a second. Okay. Don't use the end connectors to pull the cable through conduit. You'll probably pull them off or break them. We already talked about the grounding. Psalm. Where did we go? Over. Alright, so when it comes to grounding, it's kind of wet. They're all kind of wet. Lovely.
Does that void the warranty?
No? Don't have to take those boxes home. Okay, pass it all around. So this is a grounding kit we sell. It's got everything you need to attach the ground to your IF cable, and then it's got a, 8 gauge or so cable to ground that to your tower or so. This is a lightning arrestor. There's 2 varieties I'm going to pass around. One of them, this male to male, female to female, would typically be used in your shelter at the master ground bus. You literally just put it in, and then you thread your cable into both sides. The other one, that's male to female, would go directly on your ODU. You can put this right on here and come off with your grounding, and these would be your lightning arresters. Okay? So I'll pass those around so you can see them up close and personal. I'd prefer if you did not open the bag, although that one's already kind of fallen apart. Make sure that you remove any paint or anything else from the tower. And when you make this connection, you're actually getting a good ground connection to the tower, and you're not connecting to paint. Again, this is really all for the split systems, but you want to weatherize the end connector when you're done to make sure that no water gets into it. So you can use a 3M stretch tape or coax seal, any of that kind of stuff. Okay, so here's a picture that talks about what we just talked about. Right up here is your outdoor, your antenna, and then your ODU, and then the red thing right here is your lightning surge suppressor. That's going to come right off and get grounded right to your tower. As soon as the cable hits the tower,
we're going to ground it again. Okay. Ideally, we're grounding it at the bottom, and as we come in, here's your master ground bar, your lightning surge suppressor in there, and then your IDUs in here. Okay. If your tower height exceeds 165 feet, that's what this says, then you'd want to install additional grounds every 80 feet or so. Okay. As the cable's running up the tower. Those long towers, you need more of those ground units. Now the important thing to mention here is that all of this grounding will do nothing for you if your tower is not grounded properly. So we have some customers that go through all this painstaking effort to ground everything, and then they later find out that the tower at the bottom wasn't actually grounded to anything. Doesn't do you any good. Okay? Each leg of the tower should be individually connected to a buried ring around the tower. It should have these radials going into the ground for dissipation. That should also be connected back to the same ground in your shelter. Okay? So if you're building your own towers, keep all this in mind. If you're renting space from somebody else, before you go on the tower, you might want to check out the grounding. Make sure that copper thieves haven't come through and stolen all of it.
Were you recommending isolated ground for your electrical? Or are you doing all one common ground out there?
One common ground is fine as long as it's all grounded properly.
So the outdoor ground, the tower ground, the electrical ground, the utility ground, make it all common.
Yeah, hang on one same spot. Okay, if you do the all outdoor radio, assuming you're not going to extreme lengths here, it's relatively simple. Okay, ground the unit. Okay, so you've got a little grounding lug on the Apex Plus. It's right next to that BNC. So you got the ODU here, and then you've got one on the Apex Plus that says ground on it, wherever it is. Well, yeah, there's the one on the ODU. There's one on the Apex Plus as well. Your best bet's to ground them both. It's down here at the bottom underneath the IF connector. So right here is a grounding lug on the Apex Plus as well. So the best suggestion is if you can ground both this and the ODU back to your tower. Would be in good shape. I'll jump in myself today. Alright, assuming you're only going like 50 meters or so, not anything excessive, run that cable down, plug it into the PoE. You're done. That cable should be a shielded cable. Okay, whether it's Cat 5e or Cat 6, you should use a shielded cable.
I noticed that if you don't ground the shielding in it, it doesn't power on the unit.
Every unit will not power on without that shield connection or a good ground connection back to the PoE. Okay. You don't have to use shielded cable as long as this is grounded to the same ground as the PoE. It would get there. But our suggestion is to use the shielded cable. Okay, again, same grounding rules apply for tower and the shelter, and all that needs to actually be grounded. Okay, Brent, I'm sorry. Maybe if you draw them for me, I can replace them.
I think they did. I think they're in the manual.
Oh, so I just need to open the manual and copy and paste what you're telling me. Okay. Well, now you'll know how lazy I am. I can't even open the manual. All right. This is a depiction of the PoE before Brent did the painstaking effort to make us these great Visio stencils. We have this. All right. So with the Apex Plus, we've got essentially draw a line down the middle. We've got a left side and a right side. The left side is going to be used for management. Okay. The left side has the 3 ports. Boom, boom, boom. This one is your T1E1. Okay. This is only 100 megabits. 10, 100. Okay. The right side is gigabit. 10, 100, 1000. Okay. Either side will work. They'll power the radio up. You can pass traffic, all that stuff. But if you plug your data in over here, you're only going to get yourself a 100 megabit data connection. Okay. So data on the right, management on the left. So here's a couple different ways you can hook it up. All right, one power supply could go into either spot. Out of the data port, the one on the top goes to the radio, to the data port. Out of the radio management port goes to the radio's management port. The two ports on the bottom go back to your switch or your router, whatever you've got on site. Okay. If you're only going to do in-band management, you're only going to run one cable up the tower. Then ignore the left-hand side. Don't do anything with it. Right-hand side goes up. Bottom of that goes back to your switch. Power goes in. If you want some power redundancy, you can go ahead and plug 2 different power supplies in. Okay. You can't actually plug the 2 power supplies in when you're only using the one cable. My suggestion, if you're really worried about any kind of redundancy at that point, is to run 2 cables. Again, they must be shielded. This connection on the side of the PoE, this connection over here, let's spend some time outside, would go to your master ground bus, okay, or bar. This typically would be mounted right next to that, okay, right at the entry to your shelter. I understand in all sites that doesn't work and it's going to have to be somewhere else or whatever, but that's typically where you're going to want to go. You guys probably saw this yesterday, but maybe it's worth passing it around just in case you didn't see it. Did we pass one around yesterday? I think we passed it around yesterday.
If you want hooked up to that, a 8 gauge?
On the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's the suggestion.
You just can't lay that on an indoor unit, just on the top of it. There you go.
I mean, you guys saw yesterday it'll power up without even, without the ground at all, but you have no protection on it. So, really, as long as you lay it on top of the IDU, as long as you do actually connect that ground, and then you'll have some, lightning protection. Typically, you want to try to keep all that protection right at the entry point to the shelter, so it doesn't work its way inside, any farther than absolutely possible. And here's that nice Visio diagram of the same thing. Okay, so power supply input here, cable goes out to the Stratolink 24 or to the Apex Plus. This guy on the bottom goes into your switch, and then you take your ground up here into your ground bar. Again, shielded cables. Any questions on the PoE? Any of that stuff?
You said that in the future versions that the PoE would be built into the power supply? Or?
Yeah, we are they're testing it right now. A combined PoE and power supply. That would be one unit. It will not have as much lightning protection as this unit does. So this will be available as an upgrade if you want that additional lightning protection. But for the basic PoE, single unit kind of approach, we'll have it. All right, so real quick, just want to touch on some of the grounding things. We already talked about some of these, but some things that you can do for lightning protection and so forth that maybe I didn't already mention to you. Tower sites are obviously struck a lot more often than other things because they tend to be tall. Lightning-related damage is the #1 cause of repairs that tend to come back to us, and especially on the more expensive side of repairs, lightning is the particular cause. Proper grounding and surge protection dramatically reduces your likelihood of having an issue. Okay, and again, it's not just you grounding the radio and all the cable and all that. If the tower is not grounded right, you're not doing yourself any favor by doing it. In fact, if you know the tower's not grounded, you're probably better off to make sure everything is completely isolated from that tower. Okay. Now, some of the things we'll talk about that come into this is going to be radio placement. We already talked about grounding, cable grounding, surge protection. I've already talked a little bit about the tower grounding as well. If you imagine this rolling sphere, okay, that is an area that is not protected at all from lightning. Okay, so there's little balls rolling around, bouncing around on things. It's going to be able to hit anything and destroy it. So if you're at the top of the tower, you got a lot more problems than the guy who's only 20 feet off the ground at the bottom of the tower. So you want to be a little bit lower on the tower if you can afford it. Okay?
You don't want to go all the way up to the tower with your microwave if you don't need it. If you only need to be up 20 feet, there's really no benefit to going up more than 25 feet or something, right? Try to stay below 100 feet. Under 100 feet from the top of the tower. If you can be 100 feet below from the tower, above the ground level, that's even better. If you're going to be above the 100 feet, you want to use some radials that are going to make sure that there's something else higher than you. Okay.
What's the deal with the 100-foot magic number? Is that
Just statistically where it's more likely that you're going to get hit by lightning. Okay, we already talked about the grounding to the tower leg, using your large conductors. We talked about scraping away the tower. We didn't talk about using conductive grease on the connection to the tower. That's a good option. We talked about that. The more you ground, the better off you are. You know, in our previous things, I said do it every 80 feet or so. Hey, if you want to ground every 25 feet because you're in an area where you get hit by lightning constantly, more power to you. Okay. There's certain areas where obviously this is a bigger concern than others. Okay, so you have to adapt some of this to what you need. And I know certain areas where they don't put anything outdoors because they're worried about it. And they run the waveguide and they come back to a long haul. Okay. If I use fiber, you don't have to worry about grounding that because it doesn't conduct electricity.